is the 28th day of November 2023. Just a couple of days left in the year. Always takes us a few moments to get up to speed. I'm going to be your host tonight. My apologies. Not from being the host, but for slipping up here. There we go. I clicked the wrong song. That's okay. Here we go. So we got a big amount of crazy news again tonight. Just so you know, Fukushima nuclear meltdowns, reactor 1 and 2 fuel pools are 100% meltdown. Reactor 2 and 2 fuel pools at the top of the buildings are 100% meltdowns. Reactor 3 and the 2 fuel pools at the top of the buildings are 100% meltdown. And reactor 4 and 2 fuel pools at the top of the buildings are 100% meltdown. You can call in to 709-589-4406. 709-589-4406. Here we go. Consider subscribing, clicking bells, and all that other fun stuff. Let's get after it. So, generally, what we've been doing lately is trying to tell the story of Fukushima. Gunnarsson said you should move south of the equator if Unit 4 fuel pool goes dry. South of the equator. Well, Unit 4 is in your left-hand corner. It's completely gone. Helicopters couldn't go there.
And you know well at Chernobyl, the helicopter pilots that came in and that deposited the heavy materials to try to put down that fire, which all died from radiation exposure. Here's a decision question.
It was heroism.
During this operation, 600 pilots are fatally contaminated with radiation. All of them will die. But their efforts only buy a few days. Although it has been covered over, the fire still isn't out.
So all 600 helicopter pilots died. No helicopter pilots. Well, they allegedly made a couple of runs, but they couldn't get close enough to it. Reactor 3 and 4 are pretty obvious that they're gone. And any nuclear scientist on the planet, any academic, any nuclear professor, anywhere on the planet, regardless of their language, would have looked at the buildings and said Reactor 3 and 4, reactor cores and fuel pools are gone. Every International Atomic Energy Agency, everybody from UNSCLEAR and ERPA and the ICERP and the rest of the UN nuclear propaganda machines knew when they seen these buildings that they were gone. And Reactor 1 and 3 actually detonated. And so there was no way that a single nuclear scientist on the planet didn't know the reactor and the fuel pools were gone. There's no way they could have not known it. And so they've worked very diligently, very hard to manipulate you. If you went on top of these buildings, you would die within seconds. The structures you're seeing there don't physically touch the original buildings. They were meant just strictly to manipulate you. 80 years of lying to you. 80 years of lying. And so I find this incredible that nobody on the planet...
I'm standing is on top of what used to be reactor building number 4. The whole of this building was blown apart by a huge explosion.
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011.
Of the decommissioning work taking place here in Reactor 4.
At the end of our tour, we were checked for radiation exposure. In 4 hours, I received the equivalent of less than a chest x-ray.
1,500 highly radioactive fuel rods inside this pool. They've got to move them outside of this reactor.
So they're not on top of a building that don't exist. They're doing that because this is a catastrophic event for you, your loved ones, and everybody and every species on the planet. And they were aware of it from the day 5. On day 5, even France had put out a serious representation of the fallout, and their numbers are 1 million to 10 million becquerels. So in that model is at 20 days. So when that model stops, that's 20 days later. And no matter where you're to on the planet, you can see the radioactive fallout increase, and it's perpetual now. It's everywhere. They've done this to us on purpose, by the way.
Get more details on Japan's nuclear crisis. We're joined by Brendan Kennedy, Professor of Chemistry at the University of Sydney. Dr. Kennedy, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
The greatest threat to public health seems to be the spent fuel in pools of water atop the plant's 6 reactors.
At the top of the buildings, the fuel pools. So the fuel pools are gone. And the media pretending they're in the fuel pool, that should terrify you. So here we are now. We had a poll tonight. Should the International Atomic Energy Agency be outlawed worldwide after heinous claim that only 2 grams of tritium, and you don't even have the fortitude to call it tritium-3H, was released from Fukushima? We got 19 votes, 100%. And so what they're doing is perpetrating a lie claiming that only 2.2 grams is all that escaped the buildings that don't exist anymore. They're claiming nothing got out of these buildings, and there's 2 more of them, right? So South Korea's English version was the first time I heard of this was July the 13th of this year, 2023. They said 1.37 million tons of wastewater stored in the Fukushima plant includes approximately 2.2 grams of tritium. And they said they got everything else out. Of course, suggest that nothing got out and everything is in the tanks that did get off out of the buildings is insane. It's insane. They said the discharge is like throwing a sugar cube of 3 grams into the ocean, to the Pacific Ocean. And so this is a professor of nuclear and quantum engineering in South Korea. But this is backed up by the International Atomic Energy Agency, and hence the reason we got a poll tonight. Should the International Atomic Energy Agency be outlawed worldwide? And we've got them as committing so many of these blatant genocide deceits. This is genocide to deny it and not come up with solutions. It doesn't. How the world can sit in silence is. It's just. It's. I can't comprehend it. So, they got picked up 30 million one-ton bags they admit to, and that the food was banned in 14 prefectures. But 14 prefectures. So we got a rip-roaring shoe for everybody tonight. Rip-roaring shoe. The people to the right are Australia, and the guy to the left claimed he was inside the damaged reactors. So we're going to grease him over really good. And the other two with the paper suits on, the media is calling them hazmat suits. Hazmat suits. These are $9.99 painter suits at any hardware shop, right? Because the media has done that tens of thousands of times for the homeless at Fukushima. They're wearing the same suits. They're trying to imprint it into your mind. We had a poll on Sunday's show. Has 80 years of man-made nuclear fallout destroyed the ecosystem and the species? Japan journalist. I feel as people's brain damage from radiation is happening faster than we ever expected. This is Hare Krishna. He's a pro-nuclear scumbag in Japan. And he's going to say, isn't it better to ignore the harm from Fukushima? So he's trying to intimidate the scientists that you'll see in a few minutes.
Krishna, a freelance writer for Yuka Fuji, and I'm a generous member of the Scientists for Accurate Radiation Information. I'm pro-nuclear power generation. Restart of the nuclear plants much more beneficial than worrying too much about the fact-finding or the...
Worrying too much about fact-finding. It's better than worrying too much about fact-finding. What a bizarre statement to make. Here's one of the facts that he's probably not going to mention. In 2020, millions of birds, was 195 species at the same time of insect eaters, showed up over many, many states that were extremely emaciated and dead. They have no fat reserves and barely any muscle mass. And they flew till they dropped. So you had 195 species of insect-eating birds collected by people in their communities. And there's probably more species than that. But they admit to 195 species of insect-eating birds, migratory birds that showed up emaciated, couldn't find any insects to eat. When was the last time you cleaned your windshield on a regular basis for insects? 6 years ago, 7 years ago, 8 years ago or something? It's Fukushima effect. First refueling at a floating nuclear power plant. World Nuclear News promoting Russia. They're such scumbags. They never put their name on a single article. First refueling at a floating reactor. That's the military machine eating the fuel after. The world's only floating nuclear power plant is operated by Rosatom, the Russian government itself. This was a barge, 300 feet by 100 feet, I believe, that they was derelict. They patched it up and painted it and built up on it and put a reactor on it. Two small, so-called small reactors that are massive. You can't fit them in 100 transport trucks. They're changing the fuel. They have to change the fuel every 3 years. Now, history has showed us about changing the fuel on the ocean, how that works. It's a nightmare. So they're using... was put into commercial operation in May of 2020 and described as a pilot project and a working prototype. But that's plugged into the grid. They jimmied it together. They towed it up to northern Russia, and they plugged it into the grid. And so all you need is a tsunami or a mountain collapse on that big estuary or fjord and cause a small localized tidal wave, and you got yourself well, these are floating Chernobyls. These are not aircraft carriers. These are derelict barges. 144 meters long, 30 meters wide, and displaces 21,000 tons. Unlike land-based reactors, which generally require replacement proportion of the fuel rods every 12 to 18 months, in the case of these reactors, refueling takes place once every few years, including unloading of the entire reactor core. The entire reactor core. 121 fuel assemblies. And it said the radiation background on the territory did not change during the work. It corresponded to the level of natural background characteristics of the city of Privik. What an interesting statement, because they had to open the containment to change the fuel. So they had to vent everything once they opened the containment. And safety is not a big concern with these people. Just so they don't kill themselves right on the spot or blow up. But outside of that, the releases into the environment, they're not contained, obviously. There's no way to contain it, see? Because you got to open up the containment to move the fuel out. They're it's up the whole story. Now they're going to put it into a fuel pool on another barge. So that they're going to have to replenish that water every 24 hours. A huge amount of water we're talking about. Because this hot fuel is going to boil up. It's coming right out of the reactor and going straight into a barge. Nuclear power and liquid natural gas are key to low carbon future. Like, what are you talking about? And then this is the Darlington, Canadian, Ontario, which is not really Canada. It's some kind of foreign part of Canada. The Darlington nuclear power plant in Ontario. Ontario is almost all nuclear power. And they're savages, eh? They don't care about anything or anybody. Nuclear stands out as a reliable source of base load electricity. We've heard these narratives for 1,000 times. Unlike wind and solar, which produces much less energy than their rated capacities, when respectively the wind isn't blowing or the sun isn't shining. Which is like, that's a despicable argument, because there's tons of storage solutions. Canada closed 720 solar and wind farms, large solar and wind farms, mostly in Ontario, 2 years ago. Because they competed directly with nuclear. They made nuclear look stupid. And so they closed them all down. They pulled the funding of them all and then gave the nuclear industry $13 billion. And there was $4.5 billion for the solar and wind farms, the 720 solar and wind farms. The government the previous administration allocated $4.5 billion. And so they closed all the wind, all the solar. Now the money was for storage for solar and wind. And that would have been the end of nuclear right then. And so what they done was close down all the nuclear, took the $4.5 million and gave it to Bruce Nuclear Power to build storage for a nuclear power plant that doesn't need storage, rather than let the wind and solar proliferate. It was one of the most despicable, humiliating moments in the country, where you had almost $5 billion, which would have solved the storage. Nuclear low emissions, like it's absurd to suggest that something that needs 2 gas, oil, and coal power plants to run is somehow magically low emissions. Once facilities are built, at least, makes it an attractive option for reducing Canada's carbon footprint. Nuclear is got nothing to do with an option. Nuclear is strictly about looting. 90% of the money goes to administration, which is all of it siphoned off through the administration. It's like that worldwide, we notice. Cleaner nuclear. There is no such thing as clean nuclear. Nuclear hemorrhages radiation from the fuel pools into the environment. I mean, the Canadian CANDU reactors on their own are the biggest polluters of tritium on the entire planet, the CANDU reactor. It's revolting how... I'll show it to you. The Canadian CANDU reactors produce more tritium than all the reactors worldwide combined. So just the New Brunswick is 16,400,000 trillion becquerels, atoms, legally are hemorrhaged into the environment each year. And when you look at the numbers of all the Canadian reactors, which are the top ones, so take all the top ones, add them up, and then compare them to the UK, which is 8 trillion. Just the New Brunswick, the Pointe-le-Peur, is 16,400,000 trillion, and that's liquid and airborne radioactive emissions with a 120-year life cycle. And you got 50 years of this being released into the environment. And so everything you release to the environment from day one is still out there floating around. And you haven't stopped doing it. And they've had accidents that dwarfed the numbers, that they covered up and wouldn't release the documentation for several years. When the solar installations devour land, well, why aren't you using geothermal? When respectively the wind isn't blowing, the sun isn't shining, nuclear reactors can operate more or less indefinitely. Not when they can't, for starters. Well, pumped hydro can deliver 100% renewable electricity, where you create two reservoirs and you pump water up to the top one with excess energy. And then the flow of water generate electricity. So when the wind's not blowing, the sun's not shining, instead of using the ocean, you use two reservoirs and you just pump water up to the top one. So when the wind's not blowing, the sun's not shining, you got a week or two's worth of electricity sitting on top of the hill ready to come down. Doesn't that make more sense? And when you need it, you just start using it. They call them water batteries. But it's also compressed air storage. Geothermal, the forgotten renewables, has finally arrived. And the geothermal renewables have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. With the technology, you don't need to be anything but an engineer to build anything to use geothermal. And geothermal is everywhere, just like the shallow heat pumps. You can buy heat pumps for your house, and they're like $5,000 or something. They go on the external of your house, and you just drill down 100 feet, and you have a loop. And you circulate water, and then you take, in the wintertime, that'll heat your house to around 65 degrees. And in the summertime, it gets reversed. You can use it to keep your house at around 65 degrees in the summertime instead of 100 degrees. So it's very cheap, right, to take advantage of it, and it'll pay for itself, say, after 5 years. But deep geothermal, you get down a couple kilometers, you can cook a turkey. You get down another couple kilometers, and you're talking about 1,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. The biggest polluter in the ocean is ships. And 15 of the big container ships produce more pollution than all the cars on the planet combined. So I went to look for the compressed air storage, and it was gone. Well, I can find the one that I always use. But there's lots of compressed air energy storage systems. Like there's oodles of them. But they only take up a tiny fraction of the global energy grid. For storage. So HydroStar got an incredible solution for storage. Underwater compressed air energy storage system. So they use the pressure of rivers or lakes or ponds or just man-made ponds to store energy with just compression, 14.27 pounds per square inch, I believe it is, for the first 33 feet, right? The solution operates at an efficiency of 60%, which is actually better than nuclear, which is 30%. Energy storage startup, Late Sale, plots long-term game plan. There's all kinds of storage sites out there. So they're going to have compressed air and expanders that will have 370 megawatts. 370, I can't remember. So you're talking around 370,000 people you can store energy for. But there's a new kind of energy company. When the wind stops blowing, the sun stops shining, they store energy with compressed air projects. Quite a few compressed air projects. The world's largest compressed air storage grid, storage batteries, as they like to call it, can store 10 gigawatts of electricity. I think that's California. So there's a couple of them. California is set to be home to 2 new compressed air energy storage facilities. You just dig big mine shafts underground and compress air down into them. Each claiming the crown for the world's largest non-hydro energy storage system. And the facility will have an output of 500 megawatts and be capable of storing 4 gigawatts. So these are the original ones, but pumped hydro accounts for 95% of the world's grid energy storage and gigawatt capacity plants. Meanwhile, the biggest mega batteries built so far are only 200 megawatts. They're planning on building 1 gigawatt battery plants, but why would you? When you can use compressed air storage. Another technology that is in use for decades, compressed air energy storage, can store energy on a grid scale and is billed as having the reliability of pumped hydro without the same constraints on where you can build it. The McIntosh plant has been running in Alabama since 1991 and is still one of the largest energy storage plants in the world at 110 megawatts and that's output and 2.86 gigawatt hours of storage. And the new HydroStar facility are set to snatch the title, though, providing almost twice the storage capacity on an updated version of technology called Advanced Compressed Air Storage. It's stored in big underground tanks until energy is needed, at which point it is released through a turbine to generate electricity is fed back into the grid. And offers a round-trip efficiency of 40 to 52%, more like 60%. Rather than vent the heat generated as the air is compressed, they capture the heat and store it in separate thermal storage tanks, then use it to reheat the air it's fed to the turbine stage, which increases the efficiency of it. And this is all simple technology. Just like what you're looking at is one great big compressor, right? So the storage cavern is partly filled with water, and as the compressed air is piped in, the water is forced into a separate compensation reservoir. And later, when the air is needed, the water is pumped back into the air storage cavern, pushing the air out towards the turbine. So it's just a big compressor. And incredible 10 gigawatts of energy. Gigawatt hours, rather, of energy, with a 50-year shelf life. And so that's the whole system. So there's literally, you can drink the water. It's just used for compression and cooling, for instance, right? So very simple. You can build a dozen of them on a few acres. And you just dig down to the ground and use big mine shafts. And in their case, they're using a different technique where you can see the bladder they're using. Because they want, I think it's another way of increasing the horsepower or something by doing that technique. It's a very cool system. And then it just pumps electricity out. Very, very efficient, unbelievably efficient, 60+% efficient. And you can just charge up the whole system to 100%, and then it's sitting there waiting. Pretty cool. Radioactive cloud hit the U.S. aircraft carrier, that's the USS Ronald Reagan, when they were sailing in the Pacific, and helicopters were coated with radiation, causing crew members on deck to receive a month's worth of radiation in about an hour. So, what they're doing, which is unbelievable, this is the Pentagon announced, is it's absurd to suggest that getting anthropogenic man-made radiation is equal to the natural emitters that are not harmful. We're already acclimated to everything on the planet, the natural stuff, through genetic superior selection. and causing crew members on deck to receive a month's worth of radiation in about an hour. That's despicable, because people actually, they blocked up the toilets. They were throwing up. I got more of that actually coming up. I should have put that in another place. It never stops shocking me how vile and heinous and odious and low down just fraudsters when they say that it's equal to an hour of background radiation. Like, really, there should be criminal charges for people that actually write those words. It's revolting. It's a blatant spitting. It's literally spitting in your face is what they're doing when they tell you that lie. All the functions to keep the cooling water levels in number 3 reactor have failed. That was March the 12th, the day after the tsunami. And ultimately, that's reactor 3. Now, there's not a nuclear scientist, nuclear academic on the entire planet who looked at that and said, oh yeah, no, the fuel pool's at the top of the building. Now, they come out and done that, but they knew it was gone. They knew the fuel pools and the reactor cores were gone. And so in 2020... the picture to your left is where they're pretending they're in the fuel pool that obviously don't exist. The building to your left is actually completely gone. So when you look at the stump remaining, this is not a 190-story, 65-meter, 19-story building any longer. Media representatives walk on top of number 3 reactor building at the Fukushima. Well, you can't walk on top of a building that actually doesn't exist anymore. Shockwave is visible during the explosion at the Japan nuclear plant. Yeah, reactor 3 was very visible. In fact, they felt the explosion 25 miles away. 25 miles away. The worst wildlife die-off ever recorded anywhere on Earth. And we're not just talking marine die-offs, and it's a big deal. There are many, many more species are getting sick and facing the possibility of an extinction. It's an extinction. They even suggested a toxin. But radioactive fallout, anthropogenic man-made radioactive emissions are 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. So it is a toxin in many senses, and we don't have any defense mechanism, any autoimmune triggers to defend against it. And that you have to think about all the plutoniums, all the neptuniums, all the strontiums, all the iodines, all the cesiums, all the xenons, all the kryptons, all the elements are going to be in a plume, not just iodine or not just cesium. Acute hemorrhaging found in dead owls along the west coast. The mortality event began 8 months after Fukushima. Poor condition, badly emaciated when they're going through their migratory route. Experts agree many species of wildlife and fisheries are endangered globally due to large releases of radioactivity, not just in the ocean, but it was airborne, right? It covered the planet. This model is NOAA's. Covered the planet in about 20 days. Record levels of injured or California seal and sea lions turning up. Numbers are extraordinary. Pups should be weighing 2 to 3 times as much. Severely malnourished. This is a code word for emaciated. Severely emaciated. Problems with killer whales local to the west coast. Only baby born in 2013 died. Just 2 born in 2012. Depleted fish supply was blamed. No, they got leukemia from eating so much radiation. They're all gone. Shock as the sardines vanish off to California. Fishermen didn't find a single one all summer. Try wrapping your mind around that statement. Any idea how many species are dependent upon the migratory sardines? It's really something. This is about the entire Pacific coast. Canada, Mexico, the Pacific. No, we don't know why the youngs aren't surviving. Now, I was out there on the ocean January 14, 2012, getting the shit kicked out of me in the middle of winter. Experts suggest bald eagle deaths are related to Fukushima radiation. It's hard to have your national bird in your arms going through seizures. Notice that nobody's mentioned bird flus back then. That's your cover story, right? It's terrifying how the Pacific ecosystem has collapsed since Fukushima. Plutonium and uranium suspected of spreading through the food chain. Well, like, it suggests that it's suspected. It's pretty dishonest. Let's just call it what it is. I mean, how many people, are knowledgeable about the subject? Every academic on the planet would have agreed with that, right? Every nuclear scientist on the entire planet would have agreed with that statement. This is Neptunium-239, which decays to plutonium. I think that's a 54-day decay, is it? I can't remember. To plutonium-239 isotopes and plutonium-239, a 24,000-year half-life, and it doesn't lose any energy in that 24,000 years. So, like, natural stuff is radioactive, but not in a real sense of nuclear, but it's radioactive for, say, 1 billion years. So by using that knowledge, they say that long-lived man-made stuff is not active, right? But as plutonium is a fine example, and curium, these isotopes maintain their energy for 250,000 years. They have the same energy today as you'll have, and this is high energy. This is catastrophic to your immune systems of birds and insects and everything else. 16 U.S. ships that aided in Operation Tomodachi still contaminated with radiation. This was the Stars and Stripes, the military media, the military. Sailors scrubbed the flight deck, and I've had people argue with me, say, no, that's not what they're doing. Well, here's the evidence for you. Sailors scrubbed the flight deck aboard the aircraft carrier USS Ronald Reagan, following a countermeasure washdown to decontaminate the flight deck. You can't decontaminate a deck. They actually sandblasted the deck 3 different times in 3 different what they were calling refits, right? But it wasn't. They were trying to, now they admit that the whole air ventilation system is still contaminated. And that the Reagan, along with, now they were within 1 mile or 1 kilometer of the nuclear meltdowns as they were melting down and blowing up. The Reagan, along with 15 other ships that took part in the relief effort, still have some radiation contamination more than 5 years later. 5 years later. And it was sandblasted at least once during that period. In refit. So when a nuclear fuel pool goes, you have to evacuate 24 million people. This was South Korea's projection. You're going to have to evacuate 24 million people. But you're going to evacuate them. Come on, computer. I don't know what this is all about. So you would have to evacuate 24 million people, 54,000 square kilometers. You're talking about 5.4 million in South Korea, 1.1 million in North Korea, 7.9 million people in Japan, 1,000 miles away, and 700,000 in China. But Japan lost 4 fuel pools, and each fuel pool had at least 2 decades of reactor cores. And so what they done was faked it.
My understanding is on top of what used to be
get rid of the audio
reactor
for you.
building.
What they done was faked it. This is, you got ABC, Cecilia Vega, which is the major media in Australia at the time. You got BBC, which is the major media for United Kingdom, and CBS, which is the major media for North America, but particularly America. Pretending they're in a building that, now that's not all of them, that's just a fraction of them. But I put those 4 clips together and a picture of what the reactor actually looks like when they were making the video. That's what it looked like. And America got 70 reactors that are exactly like Fukushima, so they didn't have to go to Japan to fake it. They just went in one of their local reactors. Radioactive material from reactors is 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. 2 billion times. Like explosions going off in your DNA every second for the rest of your life. The U.S. Marine sprays the surface of a FA-18C Hornet aboard the aircraft carrier USS Ronald Reagan during a countermeasure washdown on the flight deck. The Reagan, along with 15 other ships, there was 25 of them, I thought, along with 15 other ships that took part in the relief effort, still have some radiation contamination. 16 U.S. ships participated in relief efforts 5 years before that. In all, there was 25 ships that took part in Operation Tomodachi, the name given the U.S. humanitarian aid operation after the large earthquake tsunami, which reached up to 130 feet. And a lot of the media, particularly the nuclear industry and the nuclear lobbying groups, will never say 130-foot tsunami. You'll never catch them saying it. All normally accessible spaces and equipment aboard the ships have been surveyed and decontaminated. So they had to decontaminate the entire ship, which can't be done. And that's why they had it up in dry dock 3 different times. The radioactive contamination found on the ships involved in Operation Tomodachi is at such low levels it does not pose a health concern to the crews, the families, or the maintenance personnel, which is exactly what it does. Good God, man. America was covered with massive numbers in Canada, for instance. And it suggests that 1 kilometer away from the disease factories themselves was not going to have any adverse side effects. These people should be arrested and they should have their fingers amputated and their tongue cut out and be locked up for the rest of their lives, or at least never allowed to speak publicly ever again. They're murderers, and they're destroying everybody's future by doing what they're doing. The largest U.S. ship to take part in our relief operations, which wasn't that, it was a nuclear experiment. They sent them in there to do a nuclear experiment on the soldiers because they can follow them for the rest of their lives. It normally carries a crew of 5,000 sailors. Well, that's what it was carrying, was 5,000. 3 years after the disaster, the Reagan's ventilation system was contaminated with 0.01 millirims of radiation per hour. Well, first off, you're going to try to say that the non-regulatory agency's guidelines advise no more than 2 millirims, which is of radiation. Now, what are you using millirims for? In 1 hour in any unrestricted area, and 100 millirims total in a calendar year from external, because you can get more millirims than millisieverts. Or the numbers look are vastly different. Internal sources, unrestricted, like internal, and that was the key word there, internal. So 0.01, which is 100% lie, because there was so much radiation, the sailors were defecating in the hallways. The toilets were plugged up from people with. This was severe radiation poisoning we're talking about. And so if the ventilation system is not, you don't measure millirims, you measure in physical atoms, because that's how it got contaminated. It's not close to the reactor. So millirims is energy. So that energy can't go all the way, well, it can in one sense, but it's Fowler is what we're talking about. That's why they were scrubbing the deck, because of Fowler, not millirims, but physical atoms, Becquerels, which is pulse of energy every second. The plant suffered multiple explosions and reactors began to melt down. Remember, this is 5 years after, right, this story? So you won't hear them use these sentences anymore today, I can tell you that much. Officials from the Non-Regulatory Commission, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which is the bootlicking lapdogs of the industry, told Congress that extremely high levels of radiation were being emitted from the impaired plant. Impaired! This is 5 years later, folks, and they're calling it impaired. Japanese nuclear experts said wind forced the radioactive plume out to sea. This is another model from Norwegian Institute of Air Research.
Jet streams are also real, and they take 3 days. Jet stream, it never stopped coming out of Fukushima, and the jet stream filled up, covered the whole ocean in less than 3 days.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I was in that. I didn't bother to check the volume on that. My apologies, everybody. Upgrade. Sailors performed work said it entailed entering deep spaces deep within the ship. Testing for radiation has found sanding, priming, and painting the areas. They were given little to no protection. I claim the Navy denied. The Navy denies everything. They're just scum. Of the 1,360 individuals aboard the Reagan who were monitored by the Navy following the incident, well, all 5,000 of them would have got contaminated, every one of them. More than 96% were found not to have detectable internal contamination. Well, you can't quantify that without killing the person and dissecting them. What they call sacrificing, like they do with the animals. So the only way you can tell the animals' internal contamination is they sacrifice the animals, right? Well, let me explain this to you, maybe. Explain it. The great Dr. Raymond Gilmedy, the most beagle-hating puppy dog killer on the planet. Let me see if I can get this first go. Oh, I got no idea what happened that time. So 144 beagle dogs and beagle puppies. 144 beagle dogs and beagle puppies. And tumors, death from the radiation began about 1.4 to 5.4 years after the exposure, single inhalation. Tumors of lung, skeleton, liver occurred beginning about 3 years after the exposure. Bone tumors found in 93 dogs were the most common cause of death, bone tumors. Liver tumors and lung tumors found in 46 dogs were the second most common cause of death. Liver tumors, which were found in 20 dogs, were the cause of death in only 2 dogs, occurred later than the bones and the lungs. And he said these tumors hang on here. I gotta find another piece. Will I find it tonight? Is tonight my lucky number? I'm not very number. Oh, pretty lucky. Let me go back to that one. This one. The finding in dogs suggests a similar dose-related biological effects could be expected in humans accidentally exposed to plutonium-238. But it was discovered, now this is Constant Holland, plutonium experiment recalled, 1976. It was discovered that human kidneys are at least 50 times less efficient than animal kidneys at removing the plutonium. All the animals died from the plutonium exposure, and humans are 50 times less efficient at removing it. So what's worse than that would be the curium-244 curium isotopes. And curium isotopes are the major byproduct in the irradiated nuclear fuel rods and comprise a significant fraction of the alpha-emitting radionuclide inventory. And so that's why, you know why they call it a corium when it melts down? Because it's producing the curium isotope. The curium isotope, you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium. So it's 20 times more efficient at killing the animals and you, because you're an animal. We's all animals. Back to the Reagan. The spokesperson for, and they got pounded because there was 21,000 pounds of plutonium in unit reactor 4 alone, not counting reactor 1, 2, 3. And number 3 was the mixed oxide, so it was a wicked amount of plutonium and curium. And so, as you can see to your right, that there is no reactor 4. It's gone. There's no fuel pools. There's no reactors. It's gone. So just a reactor core, the fuel pools would have had at least 21,000 pounds of plutonium. So Shinzo Kimura, a professor at Tokyo Medical University in Japan, studied radiation exposure from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These were external exposures that they studied, by the way. These are the bootlickers, right? Said it was too early for sailors to show symptoms of exposure-related conditions, which is absurd to suggest, 5 years later that it's too early. The next day, it could show up dramatically. They were right in the plume, sustained. They were defecating in the hallways from radiation poisoning. And so you're breathing it in. So what they're talking about is external doses. And there's people like that are destroying our world. These people are allowed free reign in the media to say whatever propaganda piece they want, and the media will happily regurgitate it, magnaphone it out into the environment. And it's absolutely destructive propaganda on top of that. But that's the Stars and Stripes. How's their poll going, I wonder? Should the International Atomic Energy Agency be outlawed worldwide after a heinous claim of only 2 grams of tritium released from Fukushima? To suggest that only 2 grams got out of the buildings is stunning. That's a stunning lie. It's so dishonest. Well, I mean, they picked up 30 million one-ton bags, for goodness sakes. Any illness sailors developed since the operation are not a result of the relief campaign, said the scumbag. There's no objective evidence that the sailors experienced radiation exposure. Well, I mean, they had to sandblast the ship 3 times. The air ventilation system they emit is still contaminated. They had to change around 12 helicopter engines because they were so radioactive. And they were right off a nuclear meltdown, for goodness sakes. And that ultimately the plume, this model I'll show you right now, the bottom left-hand corner, is 27 days of radioactive fallout covering the entire planet. So, like, the military don't like you or their own. They just hate everything, including themselves. I think the professor, though, should be sanctioned, shouldn't be allowed to teach children, that's for sure. He said it's impossible to speculate and calculate how much the doses were before the 2 decontaminations worked. The U.S. military is very good at risk management, considering that it is assumed that decontamination was conducted twice because the levels were not favorable. And so I really disrespect that academic. All the tsunami debris, there was 2,000 square miles, the size of Texas, out in the middle of the Atlantic. That was covered in radioactive fallout. So it distributed radiation quite far just to have the heavy fallout, the explosions, the detonations, right? U.S. government model of Fukushima cesium-137 particles covering the northern hemisphere. This is NOAA's depiction, right? And I showed you that a little earlier. I can show it to you again, though, if it makes you feel better. Makes you feel all warm and fuzzy inside. This model is based on 40 days. When the model stops, you're talking about 40 days. 40 nights. We sailed the North Atlantic. Scientists report... Where are we to here? Wednesday, the low levels of radiation from Japan's Fukushima disaster, first detected off the California coast 2 years ago, have been declining ever since and remain well below any levels considered unsafe for humans. The scientists from U.S. Santa Cruz and Stony Brook, New York, were responding to public concerns raised the weekend over an internet video claiming dangerously high radiation levels have been detected in the sands off the... I don't think I got that... I forgot to put the headline to that story there. I screwed up. Well, first off, there was 220 million atoms per liter of 129 iodine. There was 1 million to 10 million becquerels per liter or per cubic meter of airflow, according to France's government. And the models were based on venting, not based on the actual loss of the inventories in the meltdowns. Geiger counters are unsophisticated, do not measure radiation levels, but they are unable to detect the source of the radioactivity. More sophisticated tests of the beach sand in the Pacific area by the public health officials showed the radiation had come from natural sources, most probably from ancient rocks eroded in the bluffs above. So they said there was no anthropogenic man-made radiation whatsoever, despite the fact that we got a stupid amount of documentation of it showing up and documented by academics in America. The air samples in Tokyo, for instance, 240 kilometers away, at 270 times more contaminated with cesium-137 and global weapons Fallout Peak. 270 times more contaminated than global weapons Fallout Peak. And I mean, my God, that's a stunning amount we're talking about, isn't it? That's an absurd amount we're talking about. Oh, jeez. I guess something screwed up. That's backwards, yeah. Saskatchewan to promote nuclear advantages in France. You're like, no, Dana, no, they're not going to do something like that. That's crazy talk. Mom, Dana's got crazy talk. No, hear me out. They're, honest to goodness. So Canada is the world's largest deposit of dirty bombs. Saskatchewan is the world-leading uranium producer. It's no good for anything else. No offense. It's good for other things. I shouldn't say that. It's just, it's been infiltrated with scum for the nuclear industry. The 3-day exhibition will host more than 700 global leaders to discuss future projects, new energy models, potential nuclear applications. Like, whatever you're doing, don't use a CANDU reactor. Don't put that stupid disease factor in your country, for God's sakes. Saskatchewan Research Council signed a memorandum of understanding in 2022 with Westinghouse, which went bankrupt, right? It was brought by Brookfield, wasn't it? To export the small modular reactor eVinci for potential research and industry applications in Saskatchewan. Again, like, you don't have a license applications into the regulatory agencies, do you? Which is like 1 million pieces of paper. In fact, you're not even trying. You're not even estimating you're going to have an application into the regulatory agencies. So if you're not doing that, then why are you talking about a microreactor? Like NuScale, you're just ripping off the investors. Kate Brown. Covered a few. Kate still denies the Fukushima fuel pools are gone. But she does some pretty good work. She got some good books out there, but she lies a lot too, right? She tells a lot of truth, but that's how she gets you there and then manipulates you and omits the real good stuff. Health physiques like Geraldine Thomas. You know Geraldine Thomas, remember Geraldine?
So, for example, coming here, I would have got a dose of 0.07 millisieverts on the flight. And I actually went round Fukushima Daiichi on Wednesday, and the dose that I had going around the site, so very close to where the reactors are, it was 0.01 and probably lower, but that's the lowest it could actually read. So I got more of a dose flying here, and we'll get a dose tomorrow when I fly home, than I would have done from being in Fukushima.
That creature should be in jail forever. And she kills children with radiation for kicks when she's not out there doing lectures, lying to people. That's reactor 3. She walked around it, folks. Yeah, wandered around. She had a tin can. She was booting it down the road ahead of her. Dr. Jerry Thomas from United Kingdom, from nuclear industry, the United Kingdom nuclear industry, and Australia and Canada are really some kind of demonic demon. It's the same group. So this group of people, let's talk about that for a second. Let me fix this. Okay, here we go. Kathleen Higley is like Jerry Thomas. And she talks about the 100 experts during all the... She brags about it, actually. But it's very revealing. I'm going to play that clip. It's a couple of minute clip. But it shows you this absurd arrogance. And that she said this is a press club. I think it's a National Press Club. And she's, among other people, like the one-armed bandit, Miles O'Brien, and a couple of other demons from the industry, are telling the audience, and the audience laughs on cue. They know the gag, right? It's a very difficult subject, but they manage to know what the jokes are on you anyway. Let me find a clip here. And the speaker at that point is called Kathleen Higley. And Kathleen, well, it's best if she plays it. So she's talking about the radiation experts, how there's about 100 of them, and how they are all on UN and unclear and the same. They're making the decisions for your health, your children, your friends, your families, your community, and your planet. And these are absolutely unequivocal demons, perpetual lawyers, and you got to hear it. You got to hear it yourself to really comprehend how sadistic they actually are.
When I'm trying to pull this talk together, not only will I sort of get a little philosophical about the impacts and the like, and try to put things in context, but I also wanted to talk a little bit about who are these radiation experts that get trotted out in events like this, or that get to participate in various activities and analysis to make pronouncements about is something safe or not safe. And if you look, you'll see organizations that are often represented, the ICRP, International Commission on Radiological Protection, a premier organization. You'll see UNSCEAR and IRPA. So UNSCEAR is the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation. IRPA, the International Radiation Protection Association. The IAEA and some of its folks, the International Atomic Energy Agency. Our own U.S. NCRP. And then there are a number of other organizations. So there's PAHO, there's the Health Physics Society, there's World Health Organization. All of these will bring in, as necessary, experts to speak to you on issues related to radiation protection, radiation safety, and impacts. But if you go a little deeper and you start looking at these organizations, the ICRP, for example, very well known, it's been operating nearly 100 years, not quite. Main commission, 10 people. It's got 5 standing committees, so it's 100-ish folks. I lead one of the 5 committees. If you look at the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation that looked at the effects from Chernobyl, from Fukushima, from other areas, and that has about 30, roughly, countries that are represented in that group. If you start teasing through these pictures, you're going to see the same people on every one of those organizations. So the same people from ICRP, are on UNSCEAR, they're in ERPA. If you look at the NCRP, again, the U.S. organization that advises the country on radiation protection issues, it's 100 people, a lot of gray-haired 100 people. And most of them are part of UNSCEAR, are part of ERPA, are part of ICRP, participate in IAEA. So the result, or the real world, is that there's not that many folks that really do radiation safety, radionuclide transport, dose calculations, all of this in the world. It's a pretty small club, and we wear 20 hats. Today I put on 3 pins, and I could put on a whole bunch more, but Health Physics Society, ICRP, Certified Health Physicist, I've got NCRP on there, I've done IAEA, and so the point is, we're a small group, you should cherish us.
So she just told you that this small group sets the doses for the communities, the schools, the hospitals, the food. They're the actual mass murderers. You hear them all laughing their arse off that time? Despite its importance, as it's still practiced inside university labs and government organizations, health physics is far from an independent field engaged in the objective, open-ended pursuit of knowledge. In 1987, a year after Chernobyl, the U.S. Health Physics Society met in Columbia, Maryland. Health physicists are scientists who are responsible for radiological protection of nuclear power plants, nuclear weapon plants, and hospitals. Hospitals in that same equation. They're called on in case of nuclear accidents. The conference keynote speaker came from the Department of Energy. Like the very last ones you could conceivably trust. The biggest threat to the nuclear industry, he told the gathered professionals, was not more disasters like Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, but lawsuits because of the disclosures and the precedents that allows other people to win cases against them. After the address, lawyers from the Department of Justice met in breakout groups with the health physicists to prepare them to serve as expert witnesses against claimants suing the U.S. government for alleged health problems due to exposures from radioactivity issued in the production and testing of nuclear weapons during the Cold War. That's right. The Department of Energy, Department of Justice was preparing private citizens to defend the U.S. government's corporate contractors and to serve as objective scientific experts in U.S. courts. And for the past 75 years, the vast majority of the health physicists have been employed in national nuclear agencies or in universities with research underwritten by the national nuclear agencies. And from the end of World War II until 1970s, federal grants paid for 70% of the U.S. universities' research. The largest federal donors were the Department of Defense and the U.S. Atomic Energy Agency. An historian, People Gallison, estimated in 2004 that the volume of classified research surpassed open literature in American libraries by a 5 to 10 times. So there's 5 to 10 times more that you need a clearance to see. So you can be a professional lawyer, basically. Put another way, for every article published by the American academics in open journals, 5, which is, what is it, 3.5 million a year or something? 5 to 10 articles were filed in sealed repositories available only to the 4 million Americans with security clearance. And health physics benefited from the largest of the Pentagon and the Atomic Energy Commission. In the 1980s, Manhattan, Marshall Islands, their home blasted in nuclear tests, their bodies subject to classified medical studies by scientists contracted by the Atomic Energy Agency. And you should read this story. There is a lot of good stuff there. In Utah and Nevada, those who live downwind from Nevada test sites were lining up for the lawsuits. Meanwhile, the Metropolitan Edison Company in Pennsylvania, 3 Mile Island, faced lawsuits from plaintiffs living near 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant, which suffered a partial meltdown in 1979. How do you have a partial meltdown that lasts that long, right? They said there was no releases. Turns out 2 million people got contaminated. They claimed it was like watching color television for an extra year. But that's not how it works. It doesn't work that way. You can't conflate color television, which is really bad for you back in those days, don't get me wrong, if you're sitting in front of it. But it's not like you're ingesting radiation. It's in your body. Your body's attacking it with white blood cells every second for the rest of your life. TV, if it did have those attributes, you turn it on, you turn it off, right? But it doesn't have those particular attributes. If another nuclear accident were to occur, the U.S. International Atomic Energy Agency scumbag, IAEA, Hans Blick, told the International Atomic Energy Board of Governors a few weeks after Chernobyl, "I fear the general public will no longer believe any contention that the risk of a severe accident was so small as to be almost negligible." But I mean, they had absurd accidents before that. Santa Susana in 1959 was equal to 463 Mile Islands worth of radiation releases, apparently. From 1986, the 3-decade-old lifespan study of the Japanese bomb survivors, which was external studies, barely at that, and they only gave them health care a couple of years ago, the survivors. There's very few of them, right? They finally gave them health care, and because they've said for the last 75 years, 76 years, that there wasn't enough radiation to cause internal damage. It was only external. And so all the studies on Hiroshima and Nagasaki are based on external, which is despicable. It's despicable on a whole different level. These people are revolting. It's disgusting. And how can we have a future with this kind of scum on our planet? It became the chief reference in lawsuits over health damage from radioactive contaminants. And they use it in all kinds of other things too, where they say, well, nothing happened at Hiroshima and Nagasaki we're talking about. So nuclear, we can build a nuclear plant here, build one over there. That's been used to quantify these fake studies that only studied external at best. And like I cover Nagasaki, I cover Hiroshima's anniversary, for instance. And if you look at those, I provide you hundreds and hundreds of studies, academic studies, that quantifies was huge internal doses, and still is today. Why would you build cities back on a nuclear bomb crater? What could possibly go through your mind to do that? Western health physicists extrapolating from Hiroshima announced that given the reported levels of radioactivity released in the accident, they expect to see no detectable health problems as a result. From Hiroshima. So, and this is used as law. This is used to set policies that are still going strong today, and that are completely disproportionate to the reality. In Ukraine alone, doctors examined 70,000 children and 100,000 adults in the summer following the accident. People judged to have received high levels were sent to hospitals, and by late May, the number of hospitalized citizens rose to tens of thousands. They've done sex ratio studies on Europe because of Chernobyl. They closed, which means, and they found a huge discrepancy in males to female ratios, more males than females, which means less population, right? And means everybody was contaminated, and by proxy could end up with one of many illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries from the radiation exposure. Soviet doctors did not have access to ambient measurements of radioactivity in the environment and the food chain because that information was classified. Almost the entire territory of Belarus had been contaminated. Well, the birth rate dropped by half, and Belarus and Ukraine, immediately after this and even today, have just absurd amount of orphanages of disfigured and deformed children, particularly with Down syndrome and autism, and which were a lot of the studies worldwide. I mean, they closed 9,400 farms in Ireland, Scotland, and the United Kingdom after Chernobyl because they knew there would be a huge spike in autism and diabetes if that food circulated right away, right? It's around 400 still closed today. They should never open it because they were only checking for cesium. And obviously they weren't checking. Analyzing corpses of people who died between 1986 and 88 in the most affected provinces, Belarusian scientists learned that radioactive cesium accumulated in the spleen and the muscle, strontium in the bones, and plutonium in the lung, the liver, and the kidneys. And the bones, by the way. And when it goes into the bones of the children, it mutates their stem cells, which is incredibly problematic for the development. But then now you got to say, well, whatever's true for humans is true for the 8 million species. Because if you don't give them, the recognition that they're very vulnerable too, you're living a fantasy. The study showed that most of the exposure people received came in the form of internal exposures from ingesting radioactivity, not from external ambient gamma rays in the environment, which was also brutally, nasty, but the internal exposures, breathing it, drinking it, consuming it, showering in it, washing in it, doing your laundry in it, doing your cooking in it. Medical examinations of people in contaminated regions shows a significant increase in the general number of chromosomal mutations in newborns, and the frequency of birth defects in southern Belarus found to be significantly higher than the controlled. So I got a bunch of studies. Let me bring up some studies from after Chernobyl. There's some doozies. There's some choice ones. I got nuclear study crack. It's like nuclear study crack. Chernobyl. Chernobyl was never my friend. Chernobyl pics, is that it? I wonder. Gotta be careful, because yeah, let's bang through some of this stuff. This is crazy. I don't use this folder very often. I don't know why. It's a great folder. Evaluation of cesium-137 activities. Well, you got to do the same for uranium, plutonium, americium, plutonium, by the way. But evaluation of the cesium activities in plant drugs. So a lot of the drugs, like, first off, Ukraine is the biggest supplier of grain on the planet. This is a big, stupid nuclear wasteland pre-Russia staged event. So your plant drugs, your plants that are using for drugs are highly radioactive. Officials sharply raised radiation levels for residents to get iodine pills after Fukushima, 75 times higher than the batshit crazy World Health Organization recommended for children. So that's some serious hate right there. Back to Chernobyl. Transfer of Chernobyl-derived cesium and iodines from flower to honey to pollen, which is a good way to get rid of the bees, right, is radiation, because it covers the whole planet. It's the only pollutant that covers the whole planet, and this one is a Fukushima model, covers the whole planet in 2 to 3 to 4 weeks, and then pulses energy for millions of years at the speed of light, and it never goes away. And so everything we released is still pulsing energy. And there's 1,000 fuel pools hemorrhaging radiation into the environment every day from the reactor cores. They're still splitting atoms. This is why radiation waste... Nobody asks why is radiation waste, radioactive waste dangerous. They just say, oh, we got nowhere to put it, but nobody understands why it got to go somewhere. It's so bizarre. Italy was incredibly radioactive. Agricultural countermeasures taken in Chernobyl region. Well, you can't... What they were talking about was putting potassium fertilizer, what they call it, in the fertilizer. And that displaced the cesium, he said, so then the food wasn't sucking up the cesium. Even if that worked, there's 1,000 fission products you're supposed to worry about. It's not just cesium. And the biggest byproduct of radiative fuel is curium. And you can't displace the elements because they work with each other anyway. So anything that'll suck up potassium is going to suck up cesium too. It doesn't matter how much potassium is there, it'll still suck up the cesium because the cesium acts just like potassium. Your body is lulled in complacency to uptake it. Chernobyl fallout detected in BC seaweeds. There's so much transfer of radioisotopes to the animals. There's so many studies. I'm not going to try to get through them because I got too much to get through. Australia, Swedish lakes, the Baltic Sea, Finland, hot areas in Finland, Germany. Thyroid radiation doses in Britain rising from Chernobyl, which is very dubious, but they did close 9,400 farms in Ireland, Scotland, and the United Kingdom because of Chernobyl, so it's not 100% dubious. Yeah, it's really something. Radioseismic aquatic invertebrates, Norway, after Chernobyl. Ionizing radiation, human gender proportions at birth. So these studies terrify me because I got so many of them, where you see a big uptick in males being born compared to females. And so that's going to be true for the animal kingdom and the insects and the birds and that. And that's why you see this huge population, not just starvation. They're sterilizing the species. The propagation of Chernobyl 131 iodine impulse through the air, grass, animal, milk pathways in north and western Greece. Radioactivity in breast milk after Chernobyl. So why are they studying all that? Why are they studying all these weird things? So the pre-alpine lakes in France had hotspots, actual dangerous hotspots of radioactive fallout. And Chernobyl is nothing compared to Fukushima. Chernobyl is brutal, don't get me wrong. But they studied it everywhere. That's what these studies are showing you. Like, it's hard to comprehend it. I got a folder there with 1,800 studies I still haven't covered of Chernobyl. Terrible studies. And they study every facet of it, right? It's really fascinating when you start looking at how much they study. It's one of the favorite things. I like it like a ticker tape, where I'll take 1,000 studies and I'll just put them in a playlist, and you get a new study every 5 seconds. And sometimes when you're sitting there and you're trying to think things through about certain facets of nuclear, I'll just have a bunch of these studies playing, and then all of a sudden, aha, that's right, now I remember. Starts happening. The dispersal of Fukushima radionuclides in the global atmosphere. The global atmosphere and the oceans. Concentrations of iodine in the urine of Japanese adults and children following Chernobyl. So see the kind of study they're doing? Why are they doing these types of studies? They're not wasting... All these people are not making a huge amount of money because this is no issue. They're doing it because their job is to cover it up. Radioactivity in breast milk and placenta after Chernobyl. And hot particles in Chernobyl fallout to Finland. Everything from a meltdown is a hot particle, by the way. But Fukushima is special because they sprayed salt water over it, and the sulfur peroxide hydrogen buckyballs created at those enormous temperatures are defining for most of the species on the planet. Stay away from mushrooms, folks, for God's sakes. They're one of the worst things you can eat because of all the radiation released. The effects of radioactivity pollution on the dynamites of infectious diseases in wildlife. Well, why wouldn't that happen with humans then? Particle mixing process of Chernobyl fallout in the deep Norwegian sea sediment. Cesium, well, they closed the freshwater fishery in Sweden for 30 years. They closed 9,400 farms in Ireland, Scotland, and the United Kingdom for decades. And Chernobyl is nothing compared to Fukushima reactors and inventories and volumes. Let's get back on the story we're covering. I can't get through all of this. I'm not going to get through all the stories I got there, which is fine. We're still... And so, at the beginning of the show, you noticed I had redone a whole lot of the regular stuff I covered. And so there's a lot going on. We got a snowstorm tomorrow. And so, like an idiot, I was out trying to get the snowplow on the quad today because I haven't got the mount on right. It's everything was stripped and it's just what a nightmare. Anyway, it's all ready. If we get the snowstorm tomorrow, which is about time, we haven't had any snow we're talking about, so we've been really fortunate. But I was worried that if we didn't do it today and you get these cold weather and heavy snow, it's going to be hellish trying to do it then, right? How many studies do you want? And schizophrenia. So right after nuclear accidents, they're looking for Down syndrome and autism. And they're going to find it too in many, many different countries, a huge uptick for the next decades. But 9 months later in particular, you're going to get a huge spike. But so what's going on in the animal kingdom then is another question you need to ask yourself. And the birds and the insects and the fish. Because I can guarantee you we're much more better positioned to deal with radiation than birds and insects and everything else, and children. Radioactivity in the air around nuclear facilities was just, like Sellafield or La Hague in France has 500 security guards. They don't want you there taking pictures, or don't want you there with a Geiger count in your hand, because the releases are extraordinary. I thought we were almost through all of this. I must have imported all of them accidentally. And transfers into wild mushrooms and berries. That's why I avoid wild any kind of berries at all now. I love berries, so I eat a bit, but mushrooms and berries, the bioaccumulation is shocking. And the same thing with filter feeders like mussels and scallops and abalone and clams and stuff like that. They bioaccumulate the radiation 125,000 times more than a fish does. Because they're microscopic feeders, right? And so if you want to get leukemia, go out and eat a dozen clam or a dozen oysters or a bunch of mussels and get yourself incredibly sick for the rest of your life. Behaviors of radionuclides in soil and crop systems following contaminations. The transfer of cesium-137 from soil and plants disposition in Europe after Chernobyl. We see a lot of people in the studies. Foliage, absorption, fruit transfer of cesium into fruit trees. Well, the same thing going to apply for all the other elements, right? It's not just going to be cesium. And so doses from radiocesium and potassium-40. And so when I see studies like that, there's usually just one person with their name on it, and they're a sack of shit. They're disgusting sacks of shit. They're despicable creatures. Like the only reason you put potassium-40 in the equation is to destroy someone's ability to rationalize what's happening. Here we go. I think we're finally through it. Adults in Chernobyl, we're back to that study on hidden studies on radiation. Adults showed an increase in disease circulatory system, hypertension, coronary illness, heart problems, heart attacks, myocardial problems, plus a rise in respiratory diseases. Well, there's heart problems, liver, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline. Children showed an elevation in cases of chronic respiratory and neurological diseases, anemia, and disorders of the thyroid. So, like, your thyroid gets saturated, particularly children which are developing. When their thyroids are saturated, first off, like anybody else or any other species, they're producing a massive amount of mutated hormones, radioactive mutated hormones. And the pituitary gland stores a lot of hormones, right? And so now you're talking about real long-term trouble you're in. And this is why you see the crashing of the species worldwide and the ecosystem. Children showed an elevation but there's many more issues. Diabetes, 6 in 10 Fukushima children in Fukushima. And that the thyroid tumors of 2 centimeters or bigger, because the thyroid's only 3 by 5 centimeters, that's a big tumor, was 13,646 out of 38,000. It was like 358,000 out of a million. Pre-Fukushima was 1 in a million. And congenital heart malformations and diseases rose 14.2% in Japan in 2019. From the surgeons were saying the surgery for neonates and infants was 14.2%, which is 14,200 per 100,000 live births needed open heart surgery. These are stunning numbers. These are just unprecedented in anything in history. Catastrophic numbers. They discovered similar changes in experimental animals since doctors in contaminated regions had abandoned their jobs. Hospitals were operating at half staff, so it was most likely an under-detection of diseases rather than over-detection. The Soviet ministers in public health suppressed the information. Chernobyl, of course, what they done in Fukushima was infinitely worse than everything we're talking about there. And I mean it, right? Infinitely worse. I got 80 of them highlighted here, but I'm not going to cover all of them tonight. Soviet officials asserted that the Chernobyl fallout was contained and the citizens' exposure were not harmful. Now, I just showed you an endless amount of studies on Chernobyl that debunks any disinformation. Chernobyl was a real event, and Fukushima was orders of magnitude worse. Can China achieve its nuclear energy ambitions? No. It's just posturing. It's strictly posturing, what we're seeing with China. I mean, we should get the new numbers soon from the Energy Agency, International Energy Agency, of renewables. The renewables are going to overtake all current gas, oil, coal, nuclear plants worldwide by 2026. Around 4,800 gigawatts of between 2020 and 2026 will come online. It's not going to slow down after that. And so China doesn't need that much nukes to replenish their weapons. They're just posturing. And so that narrative was used to artificially inflate uranium stocks. Because that's all they were trying to do. Was keep the price of uranium stocks up high while they were waiting for the world to forget about Fukushima. There is no net zero without nuclear energy. Net zero was a paper written by Miles Allen. Got a nice cushy job now at Oxford, United Kingdom. And it was just another climate change creep trying to demonize you for tin cans, pop bottles, and cardboard. These are incredibly gobblish type people I've noticed over years. AtkinsRéalis to introduce development CANDU nuclear technology design at the World Nuclear Exhibition. The World Nuclear Exhibition starts, I thought it started today or something, didn't it? I can't remember. Let's see if it shows up here. The World Nuclear Exhibition 2023 in Paris next week. At the same time, they got COP28, Conference of Parties 28, and they're going to be promoting nuclear fusion of all things. So they're looking for investors because you have all these fly-by-night fusion companies set up to suck up the investors. 50 years, and they're no further ahead than they were 50 years ago. In fact, they're gone further behind. They're lazy, and there's no incentive to come up with a solution. Initial deployment targets the province of Ontario, which has a forecasted 2050 demand of an additional 18,000 megawatts, 18 gigawatts, 18 large nuclear power plants of new nuclear power. Like Canada was captured by the nuclear industry, and they're such scumbags. They're so delusional on top of that. Since the early 1970s, about 600 commercial nuclear power plants have been built around the world, with about 440 still in operations. It's 410. So you shouldn't be writing about that if you don't know that even that much. That's some of the easy stuff to figure out. The world needs to double this amount of baseload electricity, roughly equating to a market for 1,200 reactors. You don't have the supply network. You don't have the manpower. You don't have the skill base. And zero hope. It takes about 4 years to get the employees skillful enough to work on these jobs. Highly advanced Canadian CANDU technology is well positioned to capture a share of the market and maintain Canada's vital status of a Tier 1 nuclear nation. Again, the nuclear industry in Canada is nuts. Like, they're giddy with power, and they're chicken neck. They're the inbreeds of the inbreeds of the inbreeds of the inbreeds in the industry. Their parents bred with the pro-nuclear. Their parents bred with the pro-nuclear. Their parents breed with the pro-nuclear scum. And to suggest that there's going to be magically 1,200 reactors, really. Like, it's absurd to even suggest it. It's literally one of the stupidest things I've ever heard, that they're going to build 1,200 reactors. Geothermal actually exists. You don't need nuclear, gas, oil, or coal either. You can convert every one of them over to geothermal. Leave the infrastructure there. Just build your geothermal. Boast the highest safety and operating efficiency standards in the world. CANDU reactors. They're like 14,600,000 trillion isotopes released from just the New Brunswick Point Lepreau nuclear disaster site each year illegally. Canada, there is no such thing as clean nuclear. It's one of the dirtiest, not one of the dirtiest, it's the dirtiest. The majority of them are surrounded by farms because they're hemorrhaging radiation from the fuel pools 24 hours a day. No way back for BBC lead news presenter after allegations of paying for explicit images. Remember Jimmy Savile? Raped over 1,300 children in the basement of the BBC. Do you really think the executives weren't down there? Is anybody really that naive on this planet? Nuclear protesters in hazmat suits. Well, paper suits are not hazmat suits. Before they're evicted from the North Southwestern Liberal Party conference in Sydney. This is Australia, obviously. Australian nuclear industry is disgusting, isn't it? Well, I've never covered a good story about the Australian nuclear industry. A video uploaded to South Coast Labour Council Facebook pages, it's disgusting they're using Facebook, showed two men dressed in a white full-bodied suit, these are painter's suits for like $9, with radiation hazard symbols and signs reading Dutton MP for Fukushima and nukes are us. Well, there is no radiation sign, by the way, on their suits, despite the fact that's what they claim, with radiation hazard symbols. Well, I don't see any radiation hazard symbols. There's a little sticker there. It's like blown it completely out of proportion. Disgruntled members off camera could be heard yelling "piss off" to the group of men as they continued their performance. Nukes are us and nukes are us. Following the protest, Dutton took to the podium outlining his plan to start a conversation about the nuclear energy in Australia. The Mineral Council of Australia, scumbags that they are, have lobbied a huge amount of lobbyists attacking the government to make it legal to have a nuclear power plant so they can make an extra few bucks. Like the nuclear industry, once it gets a grip in your country, you don't have a future. These are scum on a whole different level. He said most Australians didn't understand the basics of nuclear energy. They had a royal commission probably 7-8 years ago on putting a nuclear dump in Australia, and he brought in all the apologists. They were telling him, oh, it's like a banana, it's like potato chips, like walking in sunshine, it's like climbing in the mountain, sleeping next to somebody. All the despicable, disgusting propaganda. And that we basically beat most of that out of them. Within the first 2 years, he stopped saying the word bananas for the most part. We stomped on everybody that wrote an article or had a video and said the word banana. We stomped them. And it seemed like an absolute endless parade of these scum. Some people in the research were influenced by The Simpsons. And every time I heard anybody invoke the Simpsons cartoon and the way that they do it, they say that's their full knowledge, is whatever they learned on the Simpsons. What you call the cut your throat in a heartbeat crowd, that's what the pro-nuclear is. They wouldn't hesitate for a split second to cut your throat if you had something they wanted. And they thought they can get away with it. Some members of the audience of 600 booed the North Southwest Liberal State Executive member, Bishop Early, when she tried to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. The traditional, I think I'll cover that again coming up. News Navigator, how are radioactive materials in discharged Fukushima water measured? And this is supposed to be the treated water. Remember this picture? This has been circulating for a few years. Now they're saying that's in Kuma. Kuma's abandoned. It's been abandoned for over 12 years because of radiation. The media answers some questions readers may have about radioactive material in treated water. There's no such thing as treated water. Does the treated water from Tokyo Electric Power Company contain radioactive material? And he said the answer is ELPS, or multi-nuclide removal equipment, can remove radioactive material from the treated water to below regulatory standard. Below it. But tritium, which is difficult to separate from water, remains. We got a poll on tritium, right? Should the International Atomic Energy Agency be outlawed worldwide after heinously claiming that only 2 grams of tritium was ever released from Fukushima. Because Fukushima has lost 4 reactors. Each reactor had millions of pounds at the top of the buildings. The buildings are completely gone. That's an extinction event. But ALPS in 2014 hadn't been operational. The AREVA system, which was France's system, was still 3.5 years later, late 2014, August, I believe it was. I'll bring it up for you. Hang on. I'm always a little bit shocked when it comes to this could one day be considered the start of the ultimate catastrophe of the world and the planet. Does it sound like there's anybody in charge? So the ALPS system, 2014, April 21st, has yet to function reliably. In other words, it doesn't function. The AREVA system, water filtration, and the ALPS is what the story was about. The AREVA system, 2014 in August, 3.5 years later, has never been used. The Siri system in 2013 didn't work. We never heard from it again after. And that they admitted back then that there was a perpetual amount going into the ocean, enormous amount of highly contaminated water directly into the ocean from a plethora of places from the reactor buildings. All right, okay. They admitted that the groundwater bypass operation didn't work, that they were going to build a fence for $1 billion. That didn't work. They were going to build an ice wall. The ice wall didn't work. You have to be pretty gullible to believe that the ALPS system exists. So TEPCO won't even admit these buildings and the fuel pools are gone. So what's the point of... Now, TEPCO exists so that you don't blame the nuclear industry. You blame a company called TEPCO that can go bankrupt on a drop of a hat. Possible radiated items stolen at a site 3 kilometers from Fukushima. 3 kilometers from Fukushima. A whole bunch of radioactive bicycles, and there was like hardware shops and all kinds of shops that were looted. And we know from urban explorers that went in there in 2019 and again this year that a hospital in Okuma was looted of over $1 billion worth of medical equipment. And so where did that equipment go? Which third world country did they sell it to? Japan, China foreign ministers make little headway on Fukushima discharge spat. Fukushima discharge spat? Spat. Spat. How can you use that word? Like, in all honesty, how can we use that word? Really, how can we use the word spat? And it's meant to promote the tritium narrative. That's what the spat is actually all about. Oh, China's mad because Fukushima's dumping water, but Fukushima didn't stop dumping water. After 5 days, most of the inventory was long gone. And if you look, this is 2 of the 4 reactors. Remember, there's 8 fuel pools that each fuel pool had decades of reactor cores that caught fire and was emitted into the environment is catastrophic to the entire ecosystem. Conveys comfort. So, South Korea and Japan, of course, have a long history, right? Same thing with North Korea. So, Japan occupied North Korea for 50 years. They only left at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So United Nations says, well, let's go in and bomb it till it doesn't exist anymore. And so that's what they done. They went in and bombed it. Breeders of popular Japanese carp in murky waters. But they live in murky waters, so nice pun on words there. After China suddenly halts imports. So China is trying to artificially get people worried about tritium instead of worried about uranium and plutonium and nuclear meltdowns and everything else. Right? And the idea is to think about seafood and don't think about I'll bring it up for you, hopefully. Maybe. Maybe not. Oh, got lucky. They want to ban the seafood because of tritium, see? But what they want you to forget it happened was that 55 countries banned the food from 14 prefectures for over a decade. And that food is never going to be safe. So they want you to forget about that and concentrate on tritium. And the food wasn't banned in 14 prefectures by 55 countries for tritium, by the way. And that right here, you see the Japanese in the no-go zone, which is a nuclear wasteland to the average normal person. They don't want to use that word, so they call it a no-go zone, but it's a nuclear wasteland. Harvesting rice right alongside the thousands and thousands and thousands of one-ton bags of radiation fallout. And that every academic on the planet that sees that and doesn't say something should be arrested. And so these are pet fish, right? It's worth $29 million a year. But it's priceless when it comes to the propaganda, isn't it? Moment Liberal speaker is booed for doing a land acknowledgement in Australia, of course, at a party conference after bizarre hazmat suit protests interrupted the events. So you remember that. Well, this lady acknowledges that the land in question were 600 Liberal members, and he said the party blamed for the disturbing response on a small clump, a tiny, tiny group of attendees. But I got the audio, so listen and tell me if it sounds like a small group or a whole lot of people. Anytime you're ready, Dana.
Just acknowledge that we are on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and acknowledge our the traditional owners.
That's a lot of people, see? That's not a small group. That's a bunch of bigoted and racist and prejudiced people. A low dose of radiation causes heart diseases and strokes. And just one hot particle can cause a cancer. And a single particle can cause a tumor in the lung. And so when the whole planet is covered in radioactivity in about 20 days, suggesting that there's no issue is pretty dishonest, isn't it? Top diplomats of South Korea and Japan vow continued effort. Now, so South Korea, Taiwan, China, and Japan, and the International Atomic Energy Agency is the orchestrator, are promoting that deceit that is only tritium from Fukushima. A photographer goes inside the ruins of the Fukushima nuclear power plant. A photographer. So you can't go in the ruins of Fukushima. It's 500 to 1 million sieverts. It's a lethal dose. So why put up such a salacious headline when anybody in their right mind knows it's not possible? Because that's what TIPCO would do, isn't it? And if you're going on this site, you're in a nuclear wasteland. And it said, for security reasons, taking pictures in many places is prohibited. Well, these pictures were released 2 years ago. And this is reactor 4, reactor 3. And you can see it's pixelated. It was taken from a drone. It was 726 pictures, I believe it is. I've done a whole presentation on the pictures. And I was shocked. When I zoomed in, I noticed everything is pixelated, including the stack. But up there in the corner, that's the common spent fuel pool. Right there. Why is that pixelated? Why is that pixelated? That's reactor 1, 2, 3, or reactor 3 and 4, rather, and the common spent fuel pool in the background, all which is right there, all pixelated. And the common spent fuel pool, which, because they don't have a repository anywhere in Japan, let alone anywhere else in the world, were stuffed. And they were at the same height. So why is the common spent fuel pool completely pixelated? But he says, it turns out that I can't photograph any of the damaged buildings in there entirely. Well, you didn't show us any pictures of the dry storage for some strange reason. Because why didn't you show us that picture there? Because that's still there today. And that in 2020, these pictures that were released showed, from the original footage, showed reactor 6 and the pump house and the stack were completely pixelated out. Why would you pixelate out reactor 6 and the pump house, which are quite a long ways away from reactor 1, 2, and 3, and 4, I might add? There's always a door, a fence, security cam in the way. And none of these can be photographed. But why not? What do you mean you can't photograph a door or a fence? It's a nuclear wasteland. The terrorists are never going to go there. The terrorists are already there. They're called the nuclear industry. There is no building, by the way. Building 3, look, that's gone. The fuel pool's reactor cores at the very top of the building. That's reactor 3. That was completely gone. That's the mixed oxide fuel, by the way. This is original footage right there. So there's lots of footage already out there. But they didn't want him showing the pictures because you'll see the fakeness right away, right? And you know that if I can get my hands on real good pictures, well, I can extrapolate from it. But reactor 3 is gone. So is reactor 4. And they built this shell. It doesn't physically touch it. Right? It doesn't touch it at all. And they're claiming the fuel pool is at the top of the building. But you can clearly see you can't just, and this is what it looks to say at the top of that building. But the building actually doesn't exist any longer. It's gutted all the way to the ground, right? But yet they claim it looks like that. And doing the same thing for this building, reactor 3, which doesn't exist. But that's the official picture. So there's not a nuclear academic on the entire planet looked at reactor 4 and said the fuel pool and the reactor core were intact. Not one, anywhere on the planet. He said, I had to use quite a bit of ingenuity to take photographs to meet the approval of the selectors. It's the same with filming, so I quickly learned that it's best to avoid long takes. After all, if there's anything forbidden on them, I risk losing the entire clip. After a while, the readings on my dosimeter, 200 microsieverts. Well, you wouldn't measure in microsieverts, you would measure it in physical atoms first. Is 1,000 times higher than the normal. And he said after a while, however, it turns out that it's not because of high radiation, but the fact that before leaving the plant, all of my photos and video clips will be checked again by a security guard. And so he's standing there with a microsiever counter, allegedly standing there. It's hard to believe anything. He said he had a difficult time getting on the site. He begged them to finally let him on the site. Well, why would you want to go to a nuclear meltdown unless you're stupid, right? They found plutonium in every sample, everywhere on all the paved surface in the communities. How bad do you think it's going to be at ground zero? And Tokyo was 29 million becquerels a square meter in the soil, but that Geiger counter is not going to find it. and he's only measuring in microsieverts. And so they gave him that. He's calling it a dosimeter for some reason. That's a Geiger counter, not a dosimeter. Fukushima Unit 1 and 2 exhaust stacks at 10 sieverts per hour. 3 sieverts is a lethal dose. So to suggest that what he's doing, I think is very dishonest and is very dubious. Inhaling just one hot particle can cause the cancer. So first off, that mask can't stop the radiation. You can put 200 million atoms on the head of a needle, but you can't see it. Does anybody really think that's going to stop the 200 million atoms from going in his mask? He shows this picture, which is literally the picture TEPCO always shows, same as this one. You can see right into the guts of the building that no longer exists. And we don't really get a shot of reactor 2 very often from that angle, do we? But I can assure you nobody's in that building. That's a complete meltdown, melt through, and gone China syndrome. And to show you this bizarre shot of reactor 4, not a whole shot, but these little crop shots. And reactor 4 doesn't exist. Right? They built that contraption to put over it to pretend that they were in the fuel pool that doesn't exist. Here he's showing 72 microsieverts an hour. And he does a lot of that, doesn't he? Holding up his Geiger counter. Again, this is very dishonest. Geiger counter. This can't quantify the actual radiation in the environment. In Japan, after 12 years, you want to use at least an inspector. In Japan, after 12 years, most of the areas around the plant have been cleaned and returned to the residents. Most of the areas around the reactors were cleaned up and returned to the residents, were they? Really? You're a despicable lawyer, sir. That's disgusting to lie like that. Next 2 units are in better condition. The spent fuel pool has already been removed. So he's saying reactor 3 and 4, which are these reactors, are in better condition than 1 and 2. Because the fuel has already been removed, Dana, from the pool. The fuel pools in the reactor cores were gone on March the 16th, 2011, over 12 years ago, almost 13 years ago. So TEPCO wrote that. And whoever that piece of shit is, trusting him is the very last thing you want to be doing. That's reactor 6, I believe, right there. He's in reactor 6. Like, the buildings actually blew up, right? The 55 countries banned the food for a decade, for 14 prefectures, not just Fukushima, because reactors actually melted down. He said, not only due to the superhuman efforts of hundreds of power plant workers, firefighters, and emergency responders, but also to the chance, or if you prefer, luck. No, the mentally handicapped, the destitute, the victims of society, the immigrants who don't speak the language. That's who was at the site. And like this person here in a paper suit, spraying a reagent to bind with the fuel particulates and pellets is to stop him from splitting the atoms into the environment. He would have died that day for sure. There's no nuclear scientists. There's no wall of nuclear scientists who've sacrificed their lives. There's no merits, badges of honors for university academics and academias that went there and sacrificed for the bigger cause. It's the homeless and the destitute. There's 16,000 workers quit. They're not workers. They're not from corporations, from nuclear. They're the homeless and the destitute and the victims of society. The immigrants don't speak the language because the building's actually detonated. Although the danger was averted, fuel remains was averted. The danger was averted. That was averted. You're a disgusting piece of shit, man. You're a despicable sack of shit, buddy. Fuel remains in the spent fuel pool in Unit 1 and 2. The most damaged ones. Look at that. They got that highlighted. The most damaged ones, Unit 1 and 2. Really? Well, they're damaged, but they ain't the most damaged ones. The most damaged ones is Reactor 3 and Reactor 4, you disgusting parasite. You despicable piece of shit. You disgusting traitor. You coward. You coward to do what you done. You coward. And here he is pretending that everything is okay. Remember this control room? They didn't open that control room for 7 years, and then they closed it again, right? That was after 7 years, that picture. This is him today. With no, not even got a face mask on, no gloves on. I can't wrap my mind around it. If that was safe, you wouldn't need a flashlight, the power would be on, right? He's a photographer and a filmmaker and a technical diver. I got 14,000 hours under the ocean. What's diving got to do with a fucking nuclear meltdown, buddy? Two sieverts an hour of better radiation emitted from a single liter leak water. And he was promoting, the scumbag was promoting the ELP system on top of that. It's 100% scum of the earth. We only got 2 stories in the middle, we'll drop through them. Sunak will pledge UK support for new climate damage fund at Conference of Parties 28, Constipated Party 28. Just another moron. Like, if you really want climate damage, one massive container ship produces more pollution than 50 million cars. And that 15 of these produces more pollution than all the cars on the planet combined. And that United Kingdom, new plants, the Hinkley Point and the Sizewell and places like that, they're the biggest construction sites in human history. They're the most resource and intensive industries in human history. There is no comparison. There is no comparison to these sites. They use the most precious metals. They got enough cement there. And look at them surrounded by farms once they start running to pollute everything. They use more resources. This is the biggest construction job in human history, by the way. And they use more resources than any industry in history, period. And everything is triple inspected before it's allowed to go to the site. And so 90% of it becomes so radioactive, it has to go to a nuclear waste site after. And they need 2 massive gas, oil, and coal plants just to build a site, to run it for its legacy, and for another 100 years to decommission the site. The last story tonight. Sellafield, proud to support a major Warrington children's charity. A nuclear waste firm is supporting a children's charity. Like, Sellafield released so much radiation into the environment, they contaminated the fucking Arctic. Excuse my English. Excuse my French English. Alrighty, how do we do on the poll? That's it, that's all I got. That's what we got tonight. 42 votes. Should International Atomic Energy Agency be outlawed worldwide after a heinous claim only 2 grams of tritium was released from Fukushima? And we got literally almost 100%. And so the show is almost over. How many views do you think I'm going to end up with after the show? It's going to be less than 40, I would imagine. Because over the last couple of weeks, the views from my live stream don't show up. I'll show you. Hang on a second. I got... Anyway, I can't... Killing me. I'll come back here in a second. Let's see if I can fix this. I'm going to refresh that page. I'll bring you back in a second. Yeah, total views. Now I got, let me see, I got 40 likes, right? I got 41 likes, 42 votes. But the total number after the show is going to be 33, or I'm sorry, 33 views. But Dana, you got all kinds of people. Now, normally you would have 110, 120 views by now, right? So a couple of weeks ago, the industry decided they weren't going to give me those views no more. And so I'll end up with about 33 views when the video is over. I kind of screwed up with the song. My apologies. I've done that last time too. I come back to the poll here. We're going to close the poll down. One more kick at it. We got 42 votes. That's fantastic. Thank you, everybody. I mean, the censorship is ridiculous they got against me. It's savage, eh? Good night, everybody. Hugs for everybody. Have a great night. I'll catch the comments after. Now, the plan was to do a show this week in particular. It was Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday. And it gives me a chance, a day break, to do all kinds of graphics and everything, and just kind of ease myself back into this hardcore live shows. And I really like the hardcore live shows. But I feel guilty if I don't do it 5 days a week. But this week, the plan was to do it, work extra hard and do the show Sundays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays. And get myself back into that Johnny on the spot kind of routine. And so that's what we basically accomplished again. I had a lot. I think I had 26 or 27 graphics I'd done today into this show tonight. And so the beginning of it, I had a whole bunch of new graphics for people to help tell the story. And I don't know how many clicks we got in the night, but so it's a lot. It's a lot, man. Okay, we'll see everybody on the next show. Stephen Young donated $50 on Sunday. Thank you, Stephen. Hope you're feeling a bit better. I know you're probably not. Have a great night, a great day tomorrow. We'll see everybody, maybe tomorrow night for 1 hour, then a 2-hour show on Thursday. I'll try for it. You got a snowstorm for tomorrow, so it's going to be hellish around here by the looks of it. Have a great night, everybody.